Thank you. It's wonderful to see you all. I love this conference, and I get to see people not often enough, but it's just so nice to see you at least once a year here. One other thing I wanted to add that I should have mentioned is that I have a talk tomorrow at 11:30 on facts for fish eaters. So there are the 2 talks this year, and I've come late. I apologize. It's because of the people who bought my tickets are university in Barcelona, where I'm going to speak next, and I think it was a language snafu. I'm not quite sure. How about this one? A lot of it's just me. I don't project well or something. All right, I'll try to do better. So thank you for being here. Thank you to the organizers. Heiko and the gang do an amazing job. Can we give them a round of applause? Doing great. The food, it's awesome. Terrific. They give us a chance to get together, and it's a wonderful thing. Also, my books are with Bite Back, and they've asked me to mention to you that they are closing before this session is out, but they'll be open again tomorrow morning, and they have a handful of my books there if you're interested. All right, with that, let's get right on to the subject at hand of overlapping oppressions. Now, I want to begin by, how am I doing at keeping my microphone up? I want to begin with some kind of refresher on some theories about overlapping oppressions, and then I want to move on to some direct challenges to us as an organization. All right, so the first part will probably take 10 to 15 minutes, and then hopefully I will end early and we can have discussion because I think that's important. Before I begin with a focus on ecofeminism, I think it's important to note that there are actually a handful of philosophies that support the idea of overlapping oppression. Ecofeminism is just one of them. Eastern philosophies are another area of my focus and work in philosophy that I think is really important for understanding the interconnected nature of basically all things. Other ecofeminists that I want to honor also before I begin my talk, Greta Gard and Carol Adams are the 2 that I'm most in touch with. Marty Keel, of course, is gone, but these are women who have come before me and done a lot of really important work in the field. Ecofeminism, it's the idea that the denigration and the oppression of women and of nature is connected. So that's kind of the fundamental idea behind ecofeminism. And what's important about this idea is that it gives us a theoretical basis for understanding why, as animal activists, we need to take these other oppressions seriously. There's a worldview that ecofeminists point out. It's a false worldview, and it's based on values that are also false. So it's important to recognize that these false value dualisms, there's kind of 3 separate parts to this. So we have a way of separating things into a dualistic view. So you can see that we have man and not man, mind and not mind. And if you think about it, these are things that we grew up with. You were either a boy or a girl, and there was no other option, right? And we've found this to be problematic. And luckily, the generation of young adults now are busting this wide apart and don't even want us to use the he and the she, which is terrific. It's a little hard for ancient people like me to change our language, but it is a great thing. It's a really good challenge for us. So these dualisms are a problem in the fact that they are false, that there really are not just male and female. I mean, there is a tremendous variety of genotypes that you can have. And we have just pretended that there's 2 because that has suited those who are in power and the way they have wanted to run societies. So they are false, and they are also have a value. And so that value is extremely problematic. First of all, this dualistic vision doesn't really exist in the real world. And second, the fact that they've been valued randomly. So if you have male and female, male is above female. It is valued more. And you can see this in so many basic ways. If you look at the medical model, it's always a man. If you see a picture of evolution, it never reaches a woman, it reaches a man. So the idealized human is always male, and frankly, white male, because that's where these come from. Because on the lesser side, you have, of course, darker. You have light on the left. So of course, it's going to be a light man that is at the top of the hierarchy. Does that make sense? You all with me on this? Okay. So once you have that hierarchy, once you have valued, you end up with a hierarchy. So something is above something else. So those who are in power, those who are in control, those who are running the show are going to stem from the side that is the ideal side. And the reason it is A and not A is because there are many ways not to be a man, right? You can be perceived as less than a man. And as you see this with kids, and you see the challenge. Calling a boy a girl is the worst insult you can give a boy, because in our cultures, you want to be a man, and if you're not, you're lesser, and they know that instinctively from growing up in the culture. So the hierarchy is part of what stems from that. One of the things that I try to do to not be part of this dualism is to use the word animal as if it were just other species. We are animals. We're great apes. And the way the taxonomy has been done is a false value in the sense of that dualism that's been put there that isn't really there. We should be part of that category, and we're not. But one thing I try to do is to use the word animal, and in that way, I don't say non-human. You're not what I am. You're an other than human. So it's a way for me, and I use it largely when I'm writing, so it's a little hard because I don't speak obviously nearly as often as I write, to transfer that into language. But I try to do so because I think it's very important. Language changes are very important to our mental concepts and how we understand the world around us. So oppressions are interconnected, and the ones on the not A side are linked. And you can see this probably the best in advertisements. So you see on the right-hand side, you see the darker skin being associated with wildness, the untameness, the uncivilization, and the female, all there together. Each one of them is linked in this ad, and you can see the name of the product there. And on the left, you see the feminine being linked with animalian, and in this case, domestic. Domestic because women are associated with domesticity. It is easy to find images like either of these, but especially the feminized exploited animal is a very common image. So once you're on that not A side, all of those tend to be conflated and mixed together. So here's a couple more example. And you can see all the things that are mixed. So if you're viewed as female, you're going to be less rational, like animals. You're going to be part of nature. You're going to be not of spirit and God. So these are the things, the way the hierarchy has divided them, all those things are kind of put together and used to demote all of those that are in the not A side. And on the right, you see how the woman is associated with production and reproduction and cows and milk by being dressed like a cow exploited for dairy. And on the left, you see the feminizing of the cow exploited for her reproduction, forced again and again to bear young that are taken from her as well as her milk. So you see here the connection between the feminine and the feminine reproductive system and the exploitation. So it's pretty easy to see the links here between speciesism and sexism. Our language shows this, and I always look to language as one of the things that we need to change, and it's also a way to talk to people, to call attention to it. So when we look at language, we can really see this feminizing and sexualizing. So we have like Mother Nature, right? We have the raping of the land. So the land isn't just destroyed, it's raped because it's a female. And the one I want to focus on today is the husbandry, because it's perhaps the one that is most offensive to me. So the idea of husbandry here is the idea that you are exploiting, you are caring for and cultivating, and you're creating out of another being, or it could be for a crop as well, something that you can use. So it's there for you. So it's a way of looking at living beings and land as a resource. And one thing I always catch people up on is calling trees, water, anything a resource. It's not a resource. It's not ours. It's not there for us to use. That's a misconception. So recognizing the links between the language here, how it shows this idea of husbandry and how it is used to exploit both the female human being and especially female animals, but really all animals. Through language, we can see also the use of words in a very denigrating fashion towards the female. Now, on the right, I have two that can be used, and it's also different in different countries. So I can't speak so much to what is happening in your country with these, in the language that is yours, but in the language that I grew up with and speak, there are two only that I really know that are used often for males, and while they may look negative, stud and dog, they're really very positive, and they can be used by men, and it's, you dog you, like, haha, wink, wink. And, a stud is just a very manly. But if you look at the ones that are used for females, they're very denigrating. The ones in red, what are the ones in red? Why are they in red? What unites them? They're farmed animals, yes. So notice how many of these, right? A comparatively small group of animals, right? And a lot of them, because they're in the same category. They're used for, they're exploited for many of the same reasons. And women down through the ages have definitely been exploited to put boots on the ground, to get sons out to work the fields, that reproduction there is definitely a link between the reproduction on farms and the reproduction of women in communities. A lot of them are associated with felines. There's some association there, and fairly common between women and cats of various kinds. So you see the ones in blue. And bitch is, of course, the female dog, and has such a derogatory sound, although there's been some effort to reclaim it. Remember to ask people to use different language when you hear these words, if you hear these words. These are not okay. These are ways of denigrating both women and animals. Images like this show us just how exploited and denigrated and objectified both women's bodies and the bodies of other animals, of animals. Sorry, see, there's that othering. The animals of the world are also seen as something to be used, something to be consumed. And we must never ignore the fact that women, females, girls, are just as exploitable and just as consumable, and you can't miss this in advertisements, how they're all about bodies and posturing and appearances. And how the gaze falls on the female, not on the male. The male is the gazer. He is the one who is there as the active individual. Here's some examples of parallel oppressions. Look at that feminized chicken. Look at that pose. It's called the Carol Adams, I think, calls it the rear entry pose. They're sexualized. These are not just bodies. These are bodies in sexual poses. Again, who is the viewer here? These are made for the male eye. Some of my favorite/least favorites are these two. The turkey hooker is particularly offensive. The blue arrow points to the writing which says, an easy pickup from pan to platter. So pickup there, the reference to prostitution. And you shove this up the coacula, which is what it's called in a bird, to move the bird from pan to platter, from oven plate to where you will consume the bird, and the very feminized, sexualized turkey. The other one, if you read it, is about healthy skin, less scratches, and cellulitis. So it's an ad for how women can make their legs nicer. For whom? Not for them. Their legs do just fine how they are. But if you want someone to look at your legs and you're going to make your legs look like our culture, my culture, I should say, wants legs to look, well, this chicken is showing you. Her legs are also consumable and for others. This is a Kentucky Fried Chicken ad. They have not missed the parallel exploitation between sexism and speciesism. Not sure about racism here with the suntan. I am flesh for you, eat me. As a woman, I am aware of this all the time. That women are there as bodies in our societies, and that we have to actively work against a culture that does not see us for who we are, but as bodies for exploitation. So oppressions are all interconnected. And we have to stand up against sexism if we want to make a change for animals. And frankly, all the oppressions are connected. I have focused on sexism, but I could as well focus on ableism, ageism, classism. They're all connected, and we cannot work just against one. So I think I wrote this, I think, in Speaking Up for Animals, that few contemporary feminists understand the connection between the oppression of women and the oppression of animals. I want to say very clearly now, few animal liberationists understand this connection, and I see it all the time. And in the next part of this presentation, I want to move on to look at some of that. Before I do this, and I have this again at the end, that I am working on a survey. I'm trying to gather information because in this movement, I think most of us in this room, I'm guessing, are pretty clear that oppressions are linked, and yet there's a tremendous amount of racism and sexism in our movement. And so the question becomes, what do we do without statistics? So I'm trying to get some actual data so that when I write about this and I have a paper that's completed except for the data, I want to be able to say what's actually going on. So that's why I'm doing this survey. So if you get a chance, please open it and take it. You shouldn't open it until you're going to take it, and it takes maybe 20 minutes to finish the survey. All right, so now we move into the talk, the part of the talk where I want to look a little more closely at our movement. And this is a much more open-ended part of the presentation, in that we're just beginning to see some of the problems. Carol Adams has been working on this for years, but she and I were talking on the phone just a few days ago and working together to try to suss out some of the things that we need to talk about to bring change as the movement shifts and these changes become more necessary. And a larger part of the movement starts to understand that something that very, very few people understood 30 years ago when Carol Adams first figured this stuff out and started to write about it. All right, so what I want to say, these are generalizations. So I'm not saying that every individual is like this. These are tendencies. And I will also say that they fit me. So animal activists tend to be women. We are the workforce. We are, I don't know if I want to say the backbone. We're the majority. There's like 70% females in the animal liberation movement. These females tend to be sensitive. That's why they are animal activists. They understand suffering. They care about suffering. And in some ways, this makes this particular group of women easier to exploit. So they're repeatedly traumatized, both because they tend to be more sensitive by nature, and also because they're animal activists. So I can remember being a child on a playground with somebody pulling the legs off a spider. I've never forgotten it. So women understand this animal exploitation differently, and this is an important thing to understand. Women have been treated in ways that are more similar to how animals, and you can see that in the sexism. The sexualizing of animals is something that I can relate to because I have been sexualized. And when I look at images of women and I look at these images of animals, I see it differently. It's closer to home for me than it can be for somebody that lives in a different type of body. So in our movement, and I can speak again largely for the United States, we have a huge problem with sexism. We also have a huge problem with racism. But I am focusing on sexism because I'm white, and it's not really appropriate for me. I can talk to people and say it's there, but I like to hear people of color talk about this. So I focus on sexism. So I definitely see that men in the movement dominate, objectify, and exploit females. I see it all the time. And I see it in various ways that we'll look at on other slides. But the important thing to know here is, remember that if these are overlapping oppressions, and all evidence suggests that they are, you aren't gonna get rid of speciesism while you're keeping up with sexism, because they are linked on the not a side. We have to clean ourselves. And our movement, and again, I have to say, I can't speak for Europe or other countries. I can say that in the United States, it is a very sexist, it is a very white, male, privileged group of people. And the arrogance is shocking. And the ignorance is shocking. Of course, Americans are ignorant in a lot of ways, but this is just another way that our ignorance is shocking. Oh, what to do with us, right? Who would elect Trump? So some of the things that I see in the movement is men dominating conversations and interrupting women. And again, if you look at the list of things that women, it takes a little extra energy to say, I was talking, or listen to me. You have to have that level of confidence to do that. In a patriarchal culture, in a culture that celebrates maleness, that's going to be more common in males. One of the most horrific things that I've been noticing, especially as I age, is how males, especially dominant males, will sexually exploit younger women in the movement. And when I was at a sanctuary, I met one of the men who'd been there 5 or 6 years, and he said to me in the course of a conversation, he said, I used to date women, but I don't anymore. There's so many young women here. I didn't know what to say to him. How do you get there from fighting speciesism to overtly practicing sexism and telling me about it, for God's sakes? He didn't get it. So another thing that's recently been happening in the United States is in big organizations, the powerful men that are in charge will ask women to date or spend time with male donors. I shouldn't say date. I don't know about that. But they will explicitly say, this older guy likes younger women. So you go talk to him. He's a donor. We want his money. That's not okay. On no level is that okay. And especially some of them are known to be, as I say, lecherous here or unsafe. One of them had been accused of rape, and it was very clear he had done it, although he was never prosecuted for it. But putting young women with this man showed disregard for the safety of the women in the group. So having casual sex is another, it's fine if you're clear. Be very clear. If that's what everybody wants and everybody knows, that's wonderful. But you need to explicitly say it. I'm here because I want to have sex with you, because I want to have sex. It isn't really with you, but you're here, and so that's fine. That's good enough for me. And then when we're done, and that's all it is. And if, that's what I'm here for. Just be clear about it. And if both parties are fine with that, that's fine. But too often, the expectations are not expressed, and they are different in the two people. So this is a really difficult thing, but I'll just tell you, one of the things I'm coming to is just don't date people in the movement. Go find somebody outside and turn them vegan and bring them in, right? It keeps everybody safe. So another factor in this, and one that I'm painfully aware of again in the United States, is the heroizing of males. And we have a group of males in the United States who just completely dominate the movement. They have the money, they are the presidents, the CEOs, they are the speakers at pretty much every event, and they are heroized. And remember now, 70% of the movement is female. Many of them are very young, right? So you can see the setup here for young people who maybe don't have a history with the movement, who aren't going to see it like I see it. And they see these heroes, and the heroes see maybe like this guy at the sanctuary I was at, right? So you can see the setup here. It's very dangerous. It's a very dangerous situation for these young women to be in. So many young women, so few males, and they tend to have the power. And many of them, and I noticed this again, I was kind of looking at the ones in the United States, they came to the movement with a lot of money. There's many very rich people that came into this movement. I thought, wow, that is so interesting when I think about it. So they could afford to go into this movement where you don't make any money. They were never going to be hurting. So these are some of the phenomena that I notice. And of course, we always have to say what to do about it. So here are some of the things that I think are important to do about it. And I think we all can participate in this, but specifically if I were going to suggest some things that men might think about doing, here's some of them. And I'll read them. Pause to let women speak first. As a teacher, the men always speak first. Women, pause. I think they're actually thinking about what they're going to say. Sorry. Sorry. But it is just definitely true that women take a little longer to speak for whatever reason. I don't know why it is. In truth, I don't know why it is, but I really notice it. So I often tell my classes, if you are a male, just know that you are more likely to speak first, and just make sure that others also have a chance to speak. So also making sure that you don't dominate the conversation. And again, this has to do with self-esteem and how we're raised. But men often feel empowered to speak. They feel like they know something. They have something to contribute much more often than females do. Do you know how often I feel like I don't have anything to say? Right? And I've studied this for years. I've written books on it. And I still feel like, what do I have to say? And that's part of our whole culture that just is demeaning towards females. So try to be quiet and listen. See what others are saying, people who are quieter or who aren't so sure of themselves. Make sure you don't objectify women or exploit them sexually or as willing labor in ways that are, we're all willing labor in this movement, I think. I know I am. But just make sure that the women aren't, for example, when there's no food, don't fall back on the expectation that women will bring the food or clean up after, right? Don't do it. It happens so often at meetings. Everyone contribute equally. I, as a white person, have come a long way in understanding racism. Just in the last decade, 15 years, just phenomenal leaps in my understanding. I think through doing a lot of the studies that I do. And I think that just as I know that I am racist, it's part of what I grew up, I just ask that we all know that we're also sexist. I'm also sexist. I grew up in a sexist culture. How do I think I'm going to not have that in me? I'm sexist and I'm racist. So we all have to own it, watch for it, work against it, try to change it. But we have to first notice it. So, and part of that is admitting when we've done things in the past, finding them, admitting them to ourselves, apologizing to others, and committing to equalizing across the board, total liberation in our lives, and call others. I like to call them in rather than call them out, especially if you're dealing with other women. I know that the call-out culture can be damaging, and we need to just assume that others need the gentleness that we would prefer, and we need to call people in rather than out. And I know we use the phrase calling out, but I prefer to call in. So women we need to believe in ourselves, and we need to realize never take anything personally. I think there's a tendency to take too much personally. I know there is in me. So we need to believe in ourselves enough to say, I do have something to say and I'm going to say it. And you know what? If it's wrong, oh well, it's not the end of the world. I'm stronger than that. I'm stronger than those words. I'm stronger than my mistakes. And we need to be willing to raise our hands to take on leadership roles. And we will be slower and we will be pausing, and up will pop the male hands, and by then the positions are all gone. So again, collectively, we need to think about that and how we can change it. All right, so, and if someone does interrupt you, again, politely, but just say, wait, I wasn't done. Can I finish? And finish what you're saying. Don't just give up. Don't just give up. And remember, I know as a white woman that my sensitivities and the bullying that I've experienced are nothing. And you should never compare oppressions, but I tell myself this, that if I were a person of color and added that on top of it, a person with a visible disability, just know that others out there are hurting in ways that we need to be attentive to. Not just sexism, but all the various oppressions. So all of us, let's be aware of our language. We all have sexism in our language. Let's root it out. We all have speciesism and racism. Let's root out those in our language. I was watching the movie Sing on the jet when I was coming here because a colleague of mine said, oh, you'll like it. There's no suffering. There's no violence. You'll be good with it. And I said, the racism just drove me nuts. So, right, the gorillas are black and they have the very kind of African features, and they're the criminals, right? They're the brute criminals. Now, I don't think that's chance. And then the black sheep, right? They had the black sheep. She turned out to be good in the end. They were all good characters in the end, but I just saw some latent racism in that. And being aware of those kind of things is important. When someone, try to be sure that women are also heard. Listen to the soft-spoken. Listen to the ones who are less inclined to speak up and say, and ask them, did you have something you wanted to say? You're thinking something. Do you want to say it? And if a woman comes to you and says that someone is mistreating her or makes her uncomfortable, believe them. Stand by them. Say, I hear you. I'm your ally. Don't question it. I think that's a really important. People don't concoct these problems. They're very real in our movement. So we all need to learn. This is one thing I've done: get ourselves educated, and we need to educate ourselves, and we need to educate others. So ask other people to also make changes, and be willing to speak out when behavior is inappropriate, and stand up against unacceptable behaviors. We have to be courageous, and one of the reasons I say this especially is for men, because as I say, generally, culturally, you are encouraged to speak out more, and you are more empowered. So you have more responsibility comparatively to speak out in these ways when you can. And to be positive, be positive. Be positive. We all need positives. I don't think any of us are lacking in negatives in our... Does anybody here really need some negatives? All right, that pretty well proves it. We don't need negatives, so let's be positive with each other. One of the things that I would never have believed I would have said 15 years ago, it is not all about the animals. It is not all about the animals. It is not. I never would have believed I would say that, because I lived and breathed animal liberation. And I thought that was really the only thing, that was my focus. Now I recognize that when women let others mistreat them because they are animal activists and they'll do anything for the animals, we can't get there from here. We have to change that. Also, it's not just about changing others, right? We have a lot of work to do. We are kind of still we are still the animal whites. And we have a lot of things in our own lives, we have to work on bringing change for ourselves if we want to change this movement. All right, now I open it up for discussion. Thank you.
So, question time. Just come up here, maybe form a line, and I will hand the microphone to you.
Thank you. I really liked it again. There are a couple of things I see in the movement that disturb me a little bit. And for example, especially with male speakers, I sometimes hear lots of vegans say, "Oh, it's so good that we have this masculine vegan role model, so men can see that you can also be masculine and vegan." And then I see lots of females who are like making a kind of hero out of that person. And I feel like this culture really teaches us to admire men more than women. And that's why like the women are doing all the work and we have those men as spokespersons and speakers and stuff. So I see women doing this, like friends of mine who like admire this male vegan activist, and I don't know how to, I just noticed it, don't know what to do with it.
Can I use this if I speak up? Okay. Remember, I think it's really important, never blame the women. Never blame the women. Really blaming anyone doesn't work, right? We've all learned this. It's just part of who we are. And I know I have done it, and I know I've also blamed others. I have done everything wrong I could possibly think of to do out of ignorance. So we come from somewhere and we have to get somewhere else. And I think that young people today are much further ahead than I was at, for example, your age. So there is a lot of hope. But it's frustrating, isn't it? It's very frustrating. Where I live in Montana, they're not ahead. They are not. They're worse than I was when I was young. It's so retro. It's just so backwards. It's so cowboy. And so I think you pointed out and you try to start conversations. And I think it is a problem. Our movement, as part of our heroizing and as part of our male leanings, yes, we're going to be strong vegans. We're going to be plant strong. We're going to have the vegan triathletes, right? So we're caught up in this world where that A side, that idealized male image, is what we're going for. And we got to change it. So that's us, right? That's one of our tasks, is to find this and talk about it. So good for you that you notice it.
I would just add, perhaps it also helps if you support also other women, if you see that they are exceptional in a leadership role or something like that.
Positives. And support people in their sensitivities too. I think that's important, to not always think that we have to be strong. We don't have to be strong. Frankly, we're not strong. We're just people. You know, we are who we are.
One thing I've struggled with in terms of ethical arguments in veganism and also in feminism is when you're speaking to someone who has clear delusions about equality between gender, trying to show them or talk to them is sometimes it's like saying, look, we're equal, like, and I'm just wondering how you combat this, because it's very difficult to communicate to someone who is just really thinking on such a different plane, when you're the person that is they're seeing as not equal to you. And I'm just wondering what you would suggest.
Run that by me again.
So someone who is sexist, how would you fight for the feminist cause to a sexist? Because as a female, it's quite difficult to do that.
Yes, it is. You are absolutely right. And this is why I call males to do as much as they can, because when they speak out for women, it's different than when we speak out for women. It's absolutely true. So how we can do that, well, there's of course some suggestions that we've looked at, but I think the main thing is to think about it ahead of time, to be ready for it, and to know what you want to do. And to also know that you don't always have to do something, that sometimes we have to protect ourselves. Sometimes we're tired. Sometimes we're already down. And don't blame yourself if you can't rise to the occasion in that moment. Again, we don't always have to be imperviously strong in our activism. We also need to nurture and take care of ourselves because, well, as you can see, I'm carrying pains from 100 years ago, right? So we have to take care of ourselves as well. So what I want to do is to ask some of you. So the question is, when we see someone being sexist, male or female, or does it matter? Okay, so either way, what are some suggestions that you all have? Because we've all seen this, and hopefully we've all addressed it. So let's examples from anyone.
Well, jokes would be an obvious candidate.
Yes, humor is so important in keeping it light. Absolutely true. So thinking of something ahead of time that you can say. Just saying that's sexist. And then saying why, because they may not know. And also being careful not to, I know as someone who has been racist and still is, someone saying that's racist, I would feel mortified because I didn't mean to be racist. So also remembering that whoever you're talking to probably didn't mean to be sexist. And if they're sensitive to it, they'll feel bad when you point out that they have been. So again, that sensitivity to others is really important. But I think blatantly saying it is one good way to go. And then smiling. That was sure sexist. You know, you're not trying to hurt them. You're just pointing it out. Other questions?
Also very important. One of them is also in the career. Generally, women get paid much less than men. And one of the reasons is because women don't even ask for a higher salary or for promotion. So that's...
Again, coming to that sense of value that we don't have, that we're used to being exploited and devalued, and it becomes part of how we view ourselves. Yep.
Hi. Thank you so much. I'm still kind of confused though, because I'm wondering, do you see of any possibilities where men can fulfill like a example kind of role? Because you would think that if 70% of the population, vegan population, is female, we need more men. And I do think that they can be good examples, and we need to have good examples. And how would you imagine those guys as examples to be it in a good way that is not sexist? I was wondering.
Yeah, these are really complicated things, right? So I'm really happy to have white activists, but I'd rather we not completely dominate and run the show and be so ignorant and arrogant, right? So, and I think the same thing goes across then to sex, that we need everybody on board. We need everybody on board. What we need is a greater representation, a more fair and equal representation. So if the movement is 70% female, 70% of the leadership roles of the CEOs, of the presidents, of the speakers should be female. Now, I say that I'm keenly aware that, okay, I'm female, but I'm white. So I'm aware that I'm taking a speaking spot as a white person. And I don't know, these don't have easy answers. But recognizing that what we need is a more representative body of across the board, from on all levels of work that we do. We want to be more representative of who humanity really is. And I think that's the goal.
First off, I just wanted to say thank you. And my question was about boundaries. So I don't know how it is like in other parts of the world, but in the US, we have a very big issue with rape culture. And like, I'm often finding myself in a situation where men are like either within the movement or outside of the movement are like trying to come on to me. And I'm like, no. And then like they have this idea that like if they just keep asking, somehow like my answer will change, and then I'll be like, hey, like this is like really upsetting, this is like really sexist, and then they like freak out on me. So like how do you enforce those boundaries in a way that like doesn't seem frightening? Because to me that's scary. If that makes sense.
What do you mean enforce the boundaries in a way that doesn't seem frightening?
Like it was like a week and a half ago, I literally had some random stranger come up to me at a bar, try to talk to me, and we had nothing in common, and he asked for my number, and I told him no, and then he stormed out of the bar. And it's like, I feel like men just do these things a lot, and it's like, how do you...
Right.
Yeah.
All right, this is a classic example of that sensitivity that leads, the same thing that leads women to want to nurture and care for animals also makes us want to nurture and care for humans differently than is the standard model that you will see from males. So when that person stormed out, most men would say, good riddance. Why should I... They would not bat an eye from my experience.
Yeah.
But women feel responsible, like we did something wrong if we hurt someone. And again, these are generalizations. They're not true for everyone. But those are just kind of classic things that we learned. From the time we're born, we are taught to serve and tend others. And so that comes out in us feeling guilty if we do something that isn't serving and tend others, but instead maybe makes them run out the door. That guy needed to run out the door. Bye, right? Wave, bye. I mean, what can you do? That's his sexism is his problem, not yours. And knowing that you did the right thing and that you're making decisions for yourself. And again, standing up for yourself and knowing that what you want, you have a right, just as anyone else, to say no to someone and not feel bad about it.
Okay, thank you.
I also wanted to thank you for bringing this kind of touchy subject, which shouldn't be touchy, but it is.
It is.
However eloquent and articulate you were, it's still confrontational in a good way. And I just wanted to thank you for being confrontational about this, because it needs to be discussed. And I actually have had this happen to me just Last night, I mean, it was like an instance of sexism that I called out, and I was a bit tired, so I guess I was myself quite confrontational.
Again, we apologize always. We always feel like something in us is wrong or responsible.
Yeah,
Just
I'm actually
seeing
not
again.
apologizing right now, but I'm just reflecting upon the fact that, you know, because as animal rights activists, we always think, how can I make the carnists feel better so that they'll go vegan, right? So I feel like we do the same. Like, how can I be less confrontational so that the guys will understand my me calling them out on sexism better. And I've had this happen, and he didn't take it particularly well, not particularly bad either, but you would think that, as I say, as animal rights activists, we are so used to, especially people who do outreach or street activism, we're so used to, and we have all these scripts for how to challenge people's beliefs, and you would think that when we're so trained to like challenge people's beliefs and try and bridge the gap between us, we would also understand both sides, what it's like to have our own beliefs challenged. And I was very disappointed to see that was not present. So I just took this spot right now to just remind everyone that these instances that you've reminded of are everywhere, and they're here. They've been here at this conference, and I'm very happy to have come here. Don't take this the wrong way, but yeah, they're everywhere, and it's really important that you spoke about this. So thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's a very good statement. Yes, it is here, it is now, always at our conferences, and we need to watch for it on ourselves and in others. Yeah, and be sensitive but strong. And you mentioned rape culture, and there's something I intended to add here but did not. And that's that if you are a male, never make the comparison of rape for any of the factory farmed animals. It's not okay. It's a trigger word. So women know what I have no doubt there are women in this room who have experienced rape and who are survivors. And for a man to stand up here and talk about rape, it's not okay. Any more than it's okay for me as a white person to talk about slavery, to make that comparison, because that's a trigger not for people who look like me. And so I have no right to trigger others. And you can still talk about these things. You can talk about sexual exploitation, for example. Use that instead of rape. Sexual exploitation, not a trigger. So we have to find other ways that are more sensitive to talking about these. And we're not denying the comparison. If you feel that comparison is strong, just find another way to talk about it. It has to do, again, with power dynamics and sensitivity to others. Any other questions?
Great.
So thanks for the very interesting talk. I cannot speak for women. I'm not a woman. I cannot speak for men either. I'm not a man. But what I was assigned male at birth, so I can talk about male privilege, and I think it's very interesting. So I'm transitioning right now from male to X, let's say. I'm non-binary, so I'm neither male nor female, and it's really interesting for me to be able to experience male privilege, or let's say I'm not verified in my transition, so as you notice, and I'm able to currently, let's say, pass as a male, and also pass as non-binary you can't pass. But it makes a huge difference if I walk in the streets passing as a male, or in an appearance which looks, what is this, to some people. And it's really amazing how this simple shift in my gender expression can really show to me personally what male privilege means. And I can very much recommend to anyone assigned male at birth. Doesn't matter if you are what your actual gender is, but the problem is that what we are assigned at birth still leads to us being exposed to this for quite some time. And yeah, it's just, for me, it's immense what this means. So if I'm walking around in the night, for example, passing as a male, it's a completely different experience. There is no, let's say, I don't feel that I have any fear or something like that. I'm just like a predator walking around. But seriously, it's I don't need to be, I have the feeling that I don't need to be afraid. Yes. But when I'm walking around, like like I look like, I mean, neither male nor female, then I feel much more vulnerable. And so this is, I just think it's important that also not to make the comparison of equality and I mean, it's very true that we're all equal and our aim is equality, but forgetting privilege is not the way to attain equality. And so I'm also just learning right now what privilege means in so many ways. And I think it's really good to try to, I don't know any ways how you can practically experience this maybe, but I think it's without doing any kind of transition, but I think it would be really interesting to find ways where you can, for example, with ableism, you can sit in a wheelchair for one day and experience it firsthand, what it's like. So there's I think it's really powerful to just demonstrate what privilege actually means.
I think you're right. I think it's really important what you're saying. And I did actually spend a week in a wheelchair just to experience that. And it is a good thing to do. And I think that experiencing it as you have is a really healthy and a good thing. And I apologize, I meant to say female identifying when I started out, to be very clear that I include anyone who's female identifying in the analysis.
Hi, thank you very much for your speak again. It's always good. I just want to disagree really shortly in two things. Like, in the beginning, you said something like that we are naturally more caring or somehow. And
I said it was a generalization.
Okay, no, just because I don't believe any woman is naturally something like about caring, because I think we are always made by society that they push us to be like with like toys and stuff. And I think just some people that are not so familiar with this discussion maybe gonna think
I misspoke. You are absolutely right. It's conditioned.
Yeah, and then just another thing that this is more about which kind of things you really believe on. I don't believe women can be sexist. I believe that we reproduce sexism, but I never believe it's the same way that a black person cannot be racist.
Yes.
I mean, we reproduce what we were what we taught. Oh, this English. Yeah, thank you. English is like yeah. But I don't believe we are actually sexist. I don't believe that the oppressed can be oppressor, like in this sense.
Yes.
So it's just like.
And I've heard this analysis and I really respect it and like it. When I look at myself, I see sexism. So I call it like I see it. But I also understand this, that it's different than sexism in a male. But it's there and it's damaging. It damages others, it damages me. So I'd actually love to talk to you about that, because who knows where I'll go with it in the future. But right now I've chosen to call myself in. I don't know. I know I'm sexist. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the talk as well. I just have more like a comment, I guess. Whenever we talk about sexism, I wonder whether we can still talk in binaries. I mean, there are so many genders, and I don't think... Can we really talk about women and men anymore? So
no, it's a problem.
We really have to rethink the whole sexism sphere, don't we?
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. And I'm not sure how to do it, but yeah, it needs to be done. And I don't know how to, I need to give the whole talk without he's and she's, but on the other hand, we still have the cultural binary, and yeah, it's a snarl. And again, I'd love to talk to you also about how to solve that or work towards solving that in the future. It's a good point.
Hello, thank you again for your presentation. And just also one comment from me, because you mentioned that as white person we shouldn't talk about slavery, and I just wanted to put a comment that white people were also slaves. It's not just dark people who are slaves.
It's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. I guess I need to straighten that out. What I guess I should say is, in my country, in the United States, our slaves were black Africans, and so white people should not talk about slavery in the United States because it is offensive to people of color. But you have an excellent point there. Yeah, very good point.
I have a friend who is from Jamaican background, and she always says that that's what our society makes us believe, that only black people were, or she prefers to say colored people, that they were slaves, whereas from the history, white people were slaves many times. That's just a thank you.
Maybe last question?
Okay, so just a very quick and practical question. You said that as men, we should call out over men when we see sexism behaviors. Like, is it the place of men to do that, or should we, like, I don't know.
What do you all say? Absolutely,
Okay.
and for the reasons mentioned is that you come from a position of power. It's like, and it's also, I know from my people of color friends that they say it's not their job to try to train all the masses of white people who are clueless. That's my job. So it's also, I get exhausted, and if you can do it, not only will you come there with more esteem, just being a male and as a peer in a different way, but it's also not something you've been dealing with since the day you were born.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
So, let's thank Lisa again.
Thank you. I just want to say terrific and thank you. And this is an ongoing process. I really appreciate your input and ongoing. I'd like more of it in the future. And I stand by it. I hold myself to it as well when I say we can't ask others to change unless we're willing to change ourselves. So thank you.